Picture this. It's 1525. King Henry VIII, one of England's most powerful and frankly terrifying monarchs, is brought to his knees. And not by some foreign army, but by his own people. A massive tax rebellion just explodes across the kingdom, seemingly out of nowhere, and it actually forces the king to back down. So the question is, was this really just a spontaneous popular uprising, or was there something a little more complicated going on behind the scenes? Well, let's dig into this historical mystery and find out what really lit the fuse on the Amicable Grant Rebellion. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to set the scene and look at the rebellion itself. Then we'll dive into two competing theories about what caused it all. Was it the people, or was it the powerful nobles? After that, we'll put on our detective hats and analyze the evidence, and then finally we'll reach a verdict on what really happened. All right, let's go back to 1525. England is an absolute tinderbox. Thousands upon thousands of regular people all across the country are flat out refusing to pay a brutal new tax. And this isn't just a few scattered protests. We're talking about organized resistance on a scale that could bring the whole kingdom grinding to a halt. You can just feel the tension in the air. And this really gets to the heart of it, right? It's a question the people back then had to face. How on earth do you fight a king? And not just any king, but Henry VIII. This is a Tudor monarch with near absolute power, a guy who wasn't exactly known for being patient or forgiving. The power imbalance was just staggering, which makes what happened next so incredible. Now, what's so amazing about this quote is who's saying it. This isn't some angry rebel shouting in the streets. No, this is from a government report. The king's own officials in Warwickshire basically had to throw up their hands and admit defeat. The resistance was just that total. It shows you this wasn't just a handful of troublemakers. This was a nationwide movement. So, that brings us to our first theory, which is the most obvious one. Let's call it the People's Rage. The idea here is that this was a totally genuine grassroots revolt by ordinary folks who had just been pushed way too far by the king's insane financial demands. The thing that finally broke the camel's back was called the Amicable Grant. And let me tell you, that name is some top-tier political spin. It wasn't amicable, and it definitely wasn't a grant. It was a forced loan, a demand for a massive chunk of people's wealth. And here's the kicker. It was levied without Parliament's permission. For the English people, that felt like pure tyranny. Yeah, and this amicable grant didn't just appear out of thin air. You have to see it as the climax of years and years of the crown just squeezing people for more and more money. They needed cash for wars in France, so they kept demanding loans and taxes that people already hated paying. By 1525, people's patience, and frankly their bank accounts, were completely tapped out. The grant was just one demand too many. And the evidence for this theory is pretty solid. Historians like Michael Graves and Andy Wood have pointed out there's a clear pattern of people getting fed up with taxes. The primary sources from the time talk about genuine, widespread anger. And get this, even powerful guys on the ground, like the Duke of Norfolk, were writing back to London basically saying, look, there's no way we can collect this tax. The people have just had enough. But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's a twist? Our second theory paints a totally different picture. What if the people's very real anger was just a convenient chess piece, being moved around the board by powerful players at court for their own political games? To get this, you have to understand the politics of Henry's court. The Tudors were still a relatively new dynasty, and they were all about centralizing power. They did this by promoting guys based on talent and loyalty, not just because they had a fancy last name. And the ultimate example of this was Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. He was a butcher's son who clawed his way up to become the second most powerful man in England. And the old blue-blooded nobility, they absolutely despised him for it. And this quote from a chronicler at the time, Polydore Virgil, just nails that feeling. He paints Wolsey as this arrogant, power-hungry social climber who everyone from the highest noble to the lowest commoner just couldn't stand. In the viper's nest of the Tudor court, Wolsey had a giant target painted on his back. And importantly, the Amicable Grant was seen as his baby. So here's how the plot might have gone down. The Amicable Grant is Wolsey's big idea. So who does the king put in charge of collecting it in the most rebellious parts of the country? The very nobles who hate Wolsey's guts, like the Dukes of Norfolk and Suffolk. And what did they do? Did they crack skulls and enforce the law? Nope. They basically did nothing. They just wrote letters to the king saying, gee, this tax is super unpopular. We can't collect it. By letting the rebellion simmer, they made Wolsey look like a fool in front of the king. It was a political masterstroke. Okay, so now we've got two really compelling but very different theories. How do we figure out which one is right? Well, to solve this, we've got to do what historians do best. We have to put our sources under the microscope. And our star witness, that chronicler, Polydore Virgil, is about to go under interrogation. And this is where it gets really interesting. On the one hand, Virgil's account is priceless. He was there, he knew the players, he saw what was happening. But, and this is a huge but, look at his bias. The guy was part of a rival political faction, and even more important, Cardinal Wolsey himself had personally thrown him in prison a few years earlier. So, can we really take his word at face value when he has such a clear reason to want revenge? It just goes to show you, even an eyewitness account needs to be read with a healthy dose of skepticism. So, we've looked at all the evidence. What's the final verdict? Was it the people's rage, or was it a noble's plot? Well, the truth, as it so often is in history, isn't a simple either-or. It was both. It was a perfect storm. I mean, look at it side by side. Both arguments have really strong evidence. The socioeconomic case points to real, painful taxes that sparked genuine anger from ordinary people. But the political case points to the undeniable scheming by nobles like Norfolk and Suffolk to take down their rival, Wolsey. You simply can't understand the whole story without seeing how these two things fit together. And that's really the key takeaway here. The people's anger, on its own, might have just been brutally crushed, and the nobles' plotting, on its own, might have just fizzled out. The rebellion only truly worked because these two powerful forces, the rage from below and the scheming from above, came together and aimed at the very same target. And that is such a rare and powerful moment in history. It shows that when the elites and the common people find a common enemy, things that seemed impossible can suddenly happen. Which leaves us with one last, nagging question. The Amicable Grant Rebellion is a moment where the voice of the people was heard, loud and clear, no doubt about it. But it also shows this complex chess game of elite politics happening just under the surface. It forces us to ask, whenever we look at a popular movement in history, when the people rise up, who is really pulling the strings?